goes on, wheel, way up in the middle of the air. Easy goes on, wheel.
Take your spot in the long line of men and women who have come here and distinguished themselves and this university. You will follow alums like many of your parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, leaders like Robert Robinson Taylor, the groundbreaking architect and administrator here who's recently honored on a postage stamp. You will follow heroes like Dr. Boynton Robinson, who survived the billy clubs and the tear gas of Bloody Sunday in Selma.
Oh, yes.
The story of Tuskegee is full of stories like theirs. Men and women who came to this city, seized their own futures, and wound up shaping the arc of history for African Americans and all Americans. And I'd like to begin today by reflecting on that history. Starting back at the time when the Army chose Tuskegee as the site of its airfield and flight school for black pilots. Back then, black soldiers faced all kinds of obstacles. There were the so-called scientific studies that said that black men's brains were smaller than white men's. Official Army reports stated that black soldiers were childlike, shiftless, unmoral and untruthful, and as one quote stated, if fed, loyal and compliant. So while the airmen selected for this program are actually highly educated, many already had college degrees and pilot licenses, they were presumed to be inferior. During training, they were often assigned to menial tasks like housekeeping or landscaping. Many suffered verbal abuse at the hands of their instructors. When they ventured off base, the white sheriff here in town called them boy and ticketed them for the most minor offenses. And when they finally deployed overseas, white soldiers often wouldn't even return their salutes. Now just think about what that must have been like for those young men. Here they were, trained to operate some of the most complicated, high-tech machines of their day, flying at hundreds of miles an hour with the tips of their wings just 6 inches apart. Yet when they hit the ground, folks treated them like they were nobody, as if their very existence meant nothing. Now those airmen could easily have let that experience clip their wings. But as you all know, instead of being defined by the discrimination and the doubts of those around them, they became one of the most successful pursuit squadrons in our military. They went on to show the world that if black folks and white folks could fight together and fly together, then surely they could eat at a lunch counter together. Surely their kids could go to school together. You see, those airmen always understood that they had a double duty, one to their country and another to all the black folks who were counting on them to pave the way forward. So for those airmen, the act of flying itself was a symbol of liberation for themselves and for all African Americans. One of those first pilots, a man named Charles DeBow, put it this way. He said that a takeoff was, in his words, a never-failing miracle where all the bumps would smooth off. You're in the air, out of this world, free. And when he was up in the sky, Charles sometimes looked down to see black folks out in the cotton fields not far from here. The same fields where decades before their ancestors worked as slaves, and he knew that he was taking to the skies for them. to give them and their children something more to hope for, something to aspire to. And in so many ways, that never-failing miracle, the constant work to rise above the bumps in our path to greater freedom for our brothers and sisters, that has always been the story of African Americans here at Tuskegee. And just think about the arc of this university's history. Back in the late 1800s, the school needed a new dormitory, but there was no money to pay for it. So Booker T. Washington pawned his pocket watch to buy a kiln, and students used their bare hands to make bricks to build that dorm and a few other buildings along the way. A few years later, when George Washington Carver first came here for his research, there was no laboratory. So he dug through trash piles and collected old bottles and teacups and fruit jars to use in his first experiments. Generation after generation, students here have shown that same grit, that same resilience to soar past obstacles and outrages, past the threat of countryside lynchings, past the humiliation of Jim Crow, past the turmoil of the civil rights era. And then they went on to become scientists, engineers, nurses, and teachers in communities all across the country and continue to lift others up along the way. And while the history of this campus isn't perfect, the defining story of Tuskegee is the story of rising hopes and fortunes for all African Americans. And now, graduates, it's your turn to take up that cause. And let me tell you, you should feel so proud of making it to this day. And I hope that you're excited to get started on that next chapter. But I also imagine that you might think about all that history, all those heroes who came before you, and you might also feel a little pressure, you know? Pressure to live up to the legacy of those who came before you. Pressure to meet the expectations of others. And believe me, I understand that kind of pressure. I've experienced a little bit of it myself. You see, graduates, I didn't start out as the fully formed First Lady.